There is a moment I keep coming back to this week. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launch a massive joint military strike on Iran. Within hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, a man who had governed Iran for nearly 37 years, who had survived assassinations, revolutions, uprisings, and sanctions, is dead. Killed in a precision strike after months of CIA surveillance that tracked his every movement, even down to the specific bunker that required 5 full minutes of elevator descent to reach. Even that was not enough. Now here's the part nobody is connecting properly. Thousands of miles away in Pyongyang, a man watched all of this unfold with a very specific kind of attention. Not the attention of a diplomat following the news, not the detached interest of a political observer. The attention of someone watching a preview of their own potential future. Jong Un saw what happened to Khamenei, and within days, he activated everything. This is not a story about the Iran war. That is the surface layer. This is a story about what Jong Un decided in the days following February 28th, what he launched, what he ordered, and what it means for the most dangerous security equation on the planet. Because what has happened on the Korean Peninsula in the last week is one of the most significant strategic shifts in years. And almost nobody is framing it correctly. Let me tell you what actually happened, why it matters, and where this is going. The strike that changed everything, for everyone. To understand Kim's calculation, you have to understand what the United States just demonstrated. This was not America's first use of force. It was not even its most destructive military campaign in recent memory. But it was something different in kind, not just degree. In January 2026, U.S. Delta Force operators went into Caracas, Venezuela, captured President Nicolas Maduro, and flew him to New York for prosecution. Then, less than 2 months later, the CIA spent months mapping the precise daily routines of one of the world's most protected heads of state, a man surrounded by elaborate security protocols, hidden locations, and a bunker so deep beneath the earth that reaching it required a 5-minute elevator ride. The CIA found him anyway. The strike killed him anyway. 2 allied leaders removed in the space of 60 days. That is the message Washington sent, and Pyongyang received it loud and clear. Now think about this from Jong Un's perspective for a moment. He runs a state whose entire political architecture is built around one central principle: the absolute supremacy and physical survival of the Supreme Leader. Everything in North Korea flows from Kim. Every major military decision, every nuclear launch authorization, every major policy call. When Kim Jong-il suffered a stroke back in 2008, all major functions of the North Korean state ground to a halt for more than 2 months because nobody had authority to act without the leader's personal seal of approval. The entire apparatus simply froze. That is not a side note. That is the fatal vulnerability at the heart of the North Korean system. And now America has demonstrated publicly that it can find and eliminate supreme leaders, even in deeply fortified positions, even with years of security preparation, even with elaborate concealment protocols. For Kim Jong Un, watching footage of Khamenei's fate was not an abstract geopolitical event. Analysts in Seoul I follow closely have been saying all week that for a regime built entirely around protecting one man above all else, seeing precisely what American intelligence and military precision can achieve, transforms theoretical threats into something viscerally, personally, real. So what does Kim do? He does exactly what you would expect him to do. He goes harder, faster, and more publicly on the one thing he believes keeps him alive. The destroyer and the missiles. What Kim actually did. On March 4th and 5th, Kim Jong Un boarded North Korea's brand new 5,000-ton destroyer, the Chohyun. This was not a ceremonial visit. He personally oversaw the test launch of what North Korean state media called strategic cruise missiles from the vessel's deck. Let me give you context for why that specific sequence of words, strategic cruise missiles, matters enormously. In the vocabulary of military signaling, the word strategic attached to a weapon system is not accidental. It means nuclear capable. Kim was not demonstrating a conventional warship. He was announcing that North Korea now has nuclear strike capability not just from land and from submarines, but from surface vessels operating in open water, a floating nuclear launch platform. After overseeing the test, Kim stood on the deck of that destroyer and declared North Korea would build the most powerful navy in the world. He announced plans for 2 new warships annually. He said North Korea's forces for attacking from both above and below the water would grow rapidly. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed this week that uranium enrichment facilities at both Yongbyon and Kangsun remain in active operation. They also reported that construction of an entirely new nuclear facility at Yongbyon appears to have been externally completed. Stop and absorb that for a second. A brand new nuclear facility. Completed. While the world was watching Iran. According to estimates from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, North Korea now has roughly 50 operational nuclear warheads, with enough fissile material for up to 40 more. Other analysts put the total warhead count higher, above 100. They have land-based ICBMs with ranges covering the entire continental United States. They have submarine-launched ballistic missiles. And now they have surface vessel nuclear strike capability. Kim also used North Korea's 9th Party Congress, concluded just before the Iran strikes, to announce the expansion of land and sea-based intercontinental ballistic missile complexes. He talked explicitly about using nuclear-capable ballistic missile submarines to extend the range and survivability of North Korea's deterrent. He talked about operational tactical missile complexes. He laid out an entire architecture for what strategists call the nuclear triad, the ability to launch a nuclear strike from land, sea, and air simultaneously, making a disarming first strike by an adversary essentially impossible. This is not posturing. This is a systematic, accelerated program that has been running for years and just shifted into a higher gear. And the timing, right on the heels of the Iran strikes, is not coincidental. The lesson Kim learned, and why it's not what Washington intended. Here is where I want to slow down, because this is the part that is being misread by almost every mainstream analysis I have seen this week. Washington appears to believe that what happened to Iran and Venezuela sends a deterrent message to Pyongyang, a signal, a warning, get in line, come to the table, or face the consequences. That is precisely the wrong conclusion. A former South Korean defense official named Song put it exactly right when he said this week that Kim's immediate reaction to seeing Iran struck was not fear of America, it was validation. As he put it, Kim's interpretation is that Iran was attacked precisely because it did not have nuclear weapons, not despite its military capability, because of what it lacked. Think about what that means. Iran had proxies across the Middle East. Iran had ballistic missiles. Iran had years of military development. Iran had formal strategic agreements with both Russia and China. Iran had the full diplomatic backing of 2 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And none of it was enough. Russia issued statements. China expressed concern. Neither country sent a single soldier or a single missile to defend a treaty partner under attack. That lesson was not lost on Pyongyang. If Russia watched an ally get struck and did nothing, what guarantee does North Korea's own comprehensive strategic partnership treaty with Moscow actually provide? This is a question analysts are asking openly right now. Some argue that the specific treaty language matters, that North Korea's agreement includes an actual mutual defense commitment, while Iran's treaty only required consultation and non-aggression. Others say that when it comes to real-world crises, what matters is not treaty text, but the willingness to act. And on that measure, Russia showed everyone exactly where it stands. The net result for Kim is not a reduced appetite for nuclear weapons. It is the opposite. The Iran crisis has provided the single most powerful piece of evidence Kim could ever want that nuclear deterrence is the only reliable form of protection that exists. Not alliances, not conventional military strength, not diplomatic agreements with great powers. Only the ability to threaten devastating nuclear retaliation if you are struck. This is the lesson Pyongyang is broadcasting internally, openly, and repeatedly right now. North Korean state media called the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran an illegal act of aggression and what they described as the most despicable form of sovereignty violation. They said it was proof that the only force capable of stopping American military aggression is nuclear weapons. That is not just propaganda. That is Kim's sincere strategic worldview, now fully reinforced by events he watched unfold in real time. The technology transfer nobody is discussing. Now let me take you somewhere that barely made the mainstream news this week, but that I think deserves serious attention. For over a decade, North Korea has been quietly building one of the most consequential proliferation relationships in the world, with Iran. The full scope of that relationship is only now becoming clearer as analysts pick through the wreckage of Iran's military infrastructure. Dr. Bruce Bechtel, a political science professor and one of the leading experts on North Korean military proliferation, published a detailed analysis this week, laying out what North Korea has actually transferred to Iran over the years. The list is extraordinary. Scud variants, No-Dong medium-range missiles, the Musudan intermediate-range system, Unha space launch vehicles used as ballistic missile development cover, Hwasong-12 and Hwasong-14 intermediate-range systems, and most critically, evidence of an 80-ton rocket booster, the core component of the Hwasong-15 ICBM, transferred from Pyongyang to Tehran. That is an intercontinental ballistic missile booster, transferred to Iran, years before the strikes. When you combine that with the confirmation that Iran was running active uranium enrichment approaching weapons-grade levels, and that North Korea has been quietly involved in warhead design consultation through channels inside the Revolutionary Guards, what you have is a proliferation picture that is far more advanced than most people realized before the conflict began. Here is why this matters right now beyond the immediate crisis. Those transfer relationships did not flow in one direction. North Korea received things back from the Iran relationship: technology data, testing feedback, financial resources, and most importantly, hard-won battlefield information about what systems survived and what systems failed under real combat conditions when Iran's missiles were targeted by American and Israeli air defenses. That information is invaluable for a weapons program. You can run simulations and models for years. Nothing replaces the data from actual operational use against real adversaries. North Korea is getting that data now, processed through whatever remains of their Iranian intelligence relationships, and feeding it directly into their own development programs. This is not theoretical. Military analysts who watch this closely believe Kim's weapons programs just received a massive intelligence windfall from exactly the kind of real-world combat data that money cannot easily buy. The geopolitical chess move Kim is now running. But here's the dimension of Kim's current position that I find most strategically interesting, and that almost nobody is talking about properly. The Iran conflict has created a gap. Both Iran and North Korea have been major suppliers of war materiel to Russia's military campaign in Ukraine: missiles, artillery shells, drones, ammunition. As Iran pivots to using its own stockpiles for its own survival, it can no longer fulfill that supplier role. That gap in Russia's supply chain now exists, and North Korea is the only entity positioned to fill it. This is not a small thing. Russia has become significantly dependent on outside ammunition supplies to sustain its operational tempo in Ukraine. With Iran now out of that picture, Russia's dependence on Pyongyang just increased substantially. That means Kim's leverage over Moscow, his ability to extract concessions, technology transfers, economic support, and diplomatic protection has also increased substantially. Kim went into the Iran crisis as one of two major weapons suppliers to Russia. He is coming out of it as the dominant one. And that means he now has more diplomatic runway, more economic cushion, and more freedom of action than he had a month ago. Pair that with the fact that Trump has expressed interest in resuming personal engagement with Kim. There is speculation about a potential meeting when Trump visits China at the end of March. And you have a very complex picture. Kim has simultaneously been given every reason to accelerate his nuclear program and potentially valuable incentive to test whether conditional dialogue with Washington might benefit him. The North Korean Foreign Ministry's response to the Iran strikes was notably calibrated. They condemned the attacks in the strongest language Pyongyang has used in years, but they avoided personally criticizing Trump directly. That is not an accident. Analysts in Seoul noted immediately that it mirrors the pattern from North Korea's response to the Venezuela operation: harsh condemnation of the act, studied silence about the actor. The message being sent is, we reserve the option of communication. Kim is running a sophisticated two-track play. He is accelerating nuclear capability to ensure Washington understands the price of military action, and he is keeping the diplomatic door fractionally open to see what Trump might offer. Those two tracks are not contradictory in Kim's worldview. They are complementary. Nuclear weapons are the leverage that makes him worth talking to. The decapitation problem. and why Kim knows he's different from Khamenei. Now, I want to address something head-on because it has been a major topic of analytical debate this week, and I think the conventional take is incomplete. Several analysts have argued this week that watching Khamenei's fate should actually make Kim more frightened of American military capability, potentially more willing to negotiate from fear. The argument goes that if the U.S. could find and eliminate a leader hiding in a 5-minute elevator descent bunker, Kim's own bunker networks offer less protection than he might believe. And without Kim specifically alive to authorize nuclear launch, North Korea's entire deterrent becomes less credible, not more. There is something to this argument. North Korea's system is uniquely centralized around Kim personally in a way that even Iran's system was not. When Kim Jong-il had a stroke in 2008, the entire state apparatus froze. Iran, centered around the collective Revolutionary Guard structure, survived Khamenei's death and reconstituted leadership within hours. North Korea has no equivalent resilience. But I think the analysts drawing a straight line from this vulnerability to Kim will negotiate are making a significant error. Here is why. Yes, the decapitation threat is real and Kim knows it. But the rational response to that threat from Kim's perspective is not to negotiate away his nuclear weapons. It is to make his nuclear deterrent more survivable, more dispersed, and more automated in its threat of retaliation, which is exactly what he is doing by moving nuclear capability onto destroyers and submarines. The logic is this. Even if a U.S. strike succeeds in eliminating Kim specifically, if North Korea has nuclear weapons on submarines at sea and destroyers at undisclosed locations, those weapons survive the strike. And if they survive the strike, they will be used by whoever is left with their fingers near the controls, creating a deterrent against the strike in the first place. Kim is not trying to make himself invulnerable. He is trying to make North Korea's nuclear response inevitable, regardless of what happens to him personally. That is a completely different and far more sophisticated strategic objective. This is why the destroyer demonstration was so specifically timed. Kim was not showing off a warship. He was demonstrating to Washington, to Seoul, to Tokyo, and to every intelligence analyst with a satellite feed that North Korea has mobile, dispersed nuclear capability that cannot be eliminated in a single precision strike on a fixed location. He is trying to make the kind of operation that worked on Khamenei structurally impossible to replicate against North Korea. What Washington got wrong, and what it means for the Korean Peninsula. Here is the broader failure of strategic logic that I have been turning over this week. The assumption embedded in both the Iran and Venezuela operations is that demonstrating willingness to remove hostile leaders will incentivize other hostile leaders to recalculate their positions and seek accommodation. Make them afraid enough, the theory goes, and they will come to the table. But there is a fundamental flaw in that reasoning when applied to nuclear-armed states. The fear produced by watching Iran does not make Kim more willing to surrender his nuclear weapons. It makes him more determined to ensure those weapons are distributed, survivable, and reliably threatening enough that no American president will ever calculate that a decapitation strike carries an acceptable risk. Iran was struck for pursuing nuclear weapons. Iran was struck because it lacked the fully operational deterrent that would have made the strike too dangerous to execute. The lesson Kim draws is not to avoid nuclear weapons. It is to get more of them, faster, and deploy them in ways that guarantee retaliation, even if the strike succeeds. Washington intended to send a deterrent signal. What it actually sent was a proliferation accelerant. And the Korean Peninsula is not the only place this lesson is landing. Every government watching the Iran crisis is watching Kim's response. Every government that has ever faced American military pressure is seeing Kim's deployment of sea-based nuclear capability and drawing their own conclusions. The entire logic of non-proliferation, that the world is safer with fewer nuclear-armed states, took a significant body blow this week. Not because of anything anyone said, because of what everyone can see. The three scenarios that now define the next year. Let me give you my honest assessment of where this goes. The first scenario is the one that feels least likely but cannot be dismissed entirely. Kim decides the Iran crisis creates an opening for a Trump engagement that his predecessor opportunities lacked. Trump has always been attracted to the idea of the personal summit, the deal that no other president could close. Kim has demonstrated enough conditional openness in his Ninth Party Congress speech, signaling he would engage if the U.S. accepted North Korea as a sovereign nuclear state, to make a narrow diplomatic lane visible. Kim's sister Kim Yo-jong was elevated to the Politburo specifically as someone with experience managing U.S. negotiations. If Trump visits China in late March and a back channel opens, you could see a summit attempt before the summer. The second scenario is the most likely near-term path. Kim continues exactly what he is doing, accelerating nuclear and missile capability, maintaining rhetorical denunciation of American military adventurism, avoiding direct confrontation or provocation, and positioning himself to negotiate from maximum leverage whenever the moment comes. He does not need to rush. Time and nuclear capability both favor him. Every month his arsenal grows more dispersed and survivable. Every month the strategic cost of any American military action against North Korea increases. The third scenario is the one that keeps people in Seoul and Tokyo awake at night. Kim interprets the U.S. being deeply committed to the Iran conflict as a window of opportunity, a moment when American military attention, resources, and interceptor stockpiles are being consumed in the Middle East, and uses that window to conduct the kind of provocations that he has historically staged when he wants to advance his nuclear program or test new systems. A long-range ICBM test, a nuclear test, an escalation on the Korean demilitarized zone. Not because he wants war, but because he calculates the diplomatic and military response will be weaker than normal given Washington's current preoccupations. U.S. and South Korea joint military exercises are scheduled to begin March 9th. That is in 1 day from right now. North Korea historically uses those exercises as a pretext for military demonstrations. Watch what happens in the next 2 weeks very carefully. The bigger picture. You are not being given. I want to step back for a moment because there is something happening at a level above all of these individual events that I think deserves to be named directly. What we are watching right now is not a series of separate crises. It is one connected transformation in how military and geopolitical power actually functions. The United States demonstrated with Venezuela and Iran that it will use precision military force to remove hostile leaders. Russia demonstrated with Ukraine that conventional territorial wars of conquest are still possible in the 21st century. North Korea is demonstrating that a state with nuclear weapons and the willingness to develop them beyond all international pressure can operate outside the normal rules of the international order with meaningful impunity. What ties all three of these together is a single underlying logic. The old rules are no longer reliably enforced, and states are drawing radically different conclusions about what that means for their security. For Kim Jong Un, the conclusion is clear. Nuclear weapons are the only currency that genuinely purchases security in a world where the most powerful military force in human history has demonstrated the willingness and capability to remove heads of state when it decides the strategic case is sufficient. That is not paranoia. That is a rational reading of the evidence available to any leader right now. And that rational reading is going to shape decisions not just in Pyongyang, but in every capital that has ever wondered whether the security guarantees of great powers are reliable or conditional. Every state that faces an adversary stronger than itself and has been weighing whether the costs of nuclear development are worth the benefits, just watch those benefits become substantially more obvious. This is the broader significance of what Kim Jong Un activated this week. It is not just about North Korea. It is a demonstration effect, and the demonstration is this. In a world where conventional alliances are unreliable and precision military strikes can reach even the most protected bunkers, the only deterrent that demonstrably functions is a survivable nuclear arsenal deployed across land, sea, and wherever else your enemies cannot neutralize it in a single strike. Kim was already on this path. The Iran crisis did not create his nuclear strategy, but it validated it in front of the entire world, and validation has consequences. What I think happens next. I have spent this week reading everything I can find on this situation. I have been following North Korea's strategic behavior for years, and I want to give you my honest bottom line. Kim Jong Un is not going to give up his nuclear weapons. That was probably never a realistic outcome, but after this week it is beyond negotiation. If Trump wants engagement with North Korea, and there are real signals that he does, it will have to be engagement that accepts North Korea as a nuclear state. That is Kim's price. It was his price before February 28th. It is even more firmly his price now. The Iranian example confirmed the one lesson Kim Jong Un has built his entire strategic worldview around. States that negotiate away their deterrents or fail to develop them fully become vulnerable to the most powerful military force on Earth. States that retain and advance their deterrence, whatever the international cost, remain in control of their own fate. Kim just watched America remove 2 heads of state in 60 days, and his response was to board a destroyer, fire a nuclear-capable cruise missile, and announce the most ambitious naval nuclear expansion in North Korean history. That is not the behavior of a man who is scared into accommodation. That is the behavior of a man who looked at what happened and concluded he was right all along. The question that will define the next decade on the Korean Peninsula is whether Washington can find a way to manage a permanently nuclear North Korea, or whether it will continue pursuing a denuclearization goal that the last week of global events has made more unreachable than at any point in the last 30 years. I do not have a clean answer to that question. Nobody does right now. What I do know is that the window everyone assumed existed for resolving the North Korea problem the way the international community wanted it resolved has not just closed. After this week, it may have disappeared entirely. And that has consequences for every government, every alliance, and every security calculation in the Indo-Pacific for a generation. If you found this analysis valuable, hit subscribe and make sure the notification bell is on, because the situation on the Korean Peninsula is going to move fast in the next 30 days, and I am going to be breaking down every major development as it happens. And I want to hear from you. Do you think Kim Jong Un will eventually come to the table with Trump, or has this week made that impossible? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. Next video, why Russia feeding Iran intelligence on U.S. warship locations just changed the calculation for every American ally in the Pacific. That story is bigger than it looks. Stay tuned.